Um, some of you were in the previous session, but for those who weren't, I'm going to give a warm welcome again to Luis Mota. We are very pleased to have Luis here. Luis is a predoctoral research fellow in economics at the Global Priorities Institute. Originally, he's from Brazil, and he received his undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Sao Paulo before joining the Global Priorities Institute. His research focuses on a range of topics, including changes in moral values, population growth, and donor coordination mechanisms. So welcome, Luis. We're very happy to have you here in EAGxLatAm. And yeah, so let's give Luis a round of applause.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone, again. So first I talked about global priorities research, and now I'm talking about local priorities research. As I said in the previous talk, you can access the slides for this presentation via this link. Reminding you again that the views that I express here are my own, and I'm not necessarily expressing the views of the Global Priorities Institute or Oxford University's views. Okay, so first, I'll quickly, this is the only thing that overlaps with the previous talk, but I'll make a definition of global priorities research here, because this will be useful for the discussion. So the definition that I'm using here is a bit different. I'm defining it as research that informs the use of resources seeking to do as much good as possible. Here, we should think about resources as, like talent, people's time, money that people use to make donations, social connections, so the network that a person has, these kinds of things. The agents who have these resources can vary, so we can think that the agents will be like EA groups trying to decide what they should do, what's the best way to make the group grow or make the group more effective. We can think that this is guiding the decisions of donors, deciding where to donate to, and for individuals more generally, trying to decide what career they should pursue, what projects they should work on. And now, local priorities research. I bring here two definitions that people have used. So it is research to figure out the most impactful cause areas, career pathways, and organizations within their local context, though impact may not be locally constrained, is one definition. And another is that local priorities research is about figuring out what are the most important problems in a local context that can best maximize impact both locally and globally. Some examples of activities that are considered local priorities research include local cause area prioritization. So EA Singapore, for example, have done this work where they define work on AI risk and on developing alternative proteins as top cause areas for top priorities for people in Singapore. Doing charity evaluation. So in Brazil, they have developed Doi Bem, which is a charity that tries to identify the best interventions within Brazil for global for health and development. Trying to identify high impact local career pathway research. And evaluating the philanthropy landscape within a region. And so what I want to focus on now is taking a step back and thinking a bit about how to restrict the scope of global priorities research to a local context. In particular, the definitions of local priorities research that I've shown combines two distinct ways of thinking about localizing global priorities research. The first of these is doing what helps the world the most, given some specific local resources. The second definition is just like do what helps a given region the most. So for the purposes of this talk, I will refer to this one as contextualization research and to the second one as local priorities research. So whenever, like from here on, whenever I say local priorities research, I'm referring to the second point here. So about contextualization research, tweaking that global priorities research definition that I gave at the start of the presentation, I'll refer to it as research that informs the use of specific resources seeking to do as much good as possible. So the key word here is specific. So we're dealing with resources that are different in some way from some abstract resource. And so we're tailoring the research that we do to important particular use cases. We can think of this as like specific country, and maybe like in some countries there is like it's less easy to move around, so immigration might be more complicated, or people might be more inclined to like stay in their country as opposed to like moving abroad and like being willing to move to work on organizations doing the work that they think is most important, but still with like this global mindset. We can think of this research as being done at the individual level. So when I think about my own career and how my skills fit the broader EA framework, this is also a kind of contextualization research that I'm doing. This doesn't mean that the specificity of these resources are like some form of limitation. We can think that there are like two people who are like equally talented and like both very skilled, but one of them has, for example, a very big network, like social network connections within the government in the country that they come from. And so maybe it would be a good idea for the person with this these social connections to stay in the country and try to do good, making use of their resources. Some examples of projects that would fit this contextualization research include evaluating the comparative advantages of the country. So trying to see, like, out of the cause areas within the EA movement, which cause areas could they try to find like good opportunities within the country, for example, and which cause areas are probably not such a good idea. Identifying career pathways for working on important causes within like a country. And this would also be like taking this framework in mind. So like seeing which organizations are doing like quite impactful work that can do a substantial amount of good at a global level. And another one would be looking at, for example, looking into the most cost-effective ways to make international donations, like just trying to figure that out because, it can help in the use of these resources. On the other hand, so local priorities research, the definition that I'll use here is this one. So it's research that informs the use of resources seeking to do as much good for a certain region as possible. So the key thing here is that we're restricting the scope of altruism to a local level. The resources are not necessarily restricted to the local level. So you can think that someone cares about the local level, but they want to do the most good as possible to their country, and so they're willing to move abroad or to give there and donate to their country. You can also think that they would be willing to donate to international charities that operate in their country, but are based abroad and receive donations only from internationally. So even though they want to help their country, they might think that the best way to do so is donating internationally. So in most cases where I've seen local priorities research, it has been associated to like health and development, so trying to identify interventions within health and development in the countries where people come from. And some examples would be trying to map out what what the main problems in one's country actually are, which can be substantially different from like the broader EA framework. And within that, trying to evaluate which charities are working on these main problems and which of these charities are doing the best work in these problems. So here's a summary of the difference. So global priorities research has a global scope of altruism and may or may not have specific resources. Contextualization research has a global scope of altruism and has specific resources, and local priorities research has a local scope of altruism and may or may not have specific resources. So now I turn to the question of which one, if any, should EAs do? And to my mind, contextualization research is a kind of global priorities research. So yeah, as we saw in the slide before, like it's only like considering a form of like specific resources, but doing so might still be a way of getting the most good done, as it might be able to substantially increase the effectiveness of the resources that we have. On the other hand, local priorities research lacks, as I define it, lacks a really important principle for effective altruism, which is that of impartiality. So as I mentioned in the previous talk, this idea of not trying to restrict the set of people that you're trying to help to a certain region, that's a really important principle behind EA. And like doing local priorities research ends up violating this kind of doing local priorities research per se ends up violating this notion. I should say that I still think it's like a really valuable kind of research, and it brings one important aspect of EA to like, it might increase the effectiveness of the nations and the work that people would otherwise do. And it also helps bring this effectiveness mindset to people, and it might serve as a first step towards thinking about things in this more impartial manner and trying to do the most good possible. And in particular, it might be especially valuable for people who only care about their own region. So if there are people who actually don't want to help the world, but they want to help their own country, then maybe we should also consider this as like resources that can be used for doing useful work. My conclusion here is that EAs should try to focus on this contextualization research, which is just having this global scope of altruism in mind, having like the entire world in mind. And my suggestion for how to start to think about doing this would be to understand what the resources that you have actually are or will be. And so in particular, this suggests that this research becomes more valuable as a group grows and you actually know what members of an EA group, say here in Mexico, actually want to do, what limitations they face, what they care about, what cause areas they want to work on, and what are the opportunities within a country. It also matters whether they are only willing to maybe some people are not willing to, I don't know, make donations to help Africa, but maybe they're willing to help other Latin American countries. And in this case, maybe if you're trying to do research to get people to donate and work in these areas, then you might want to try to find good opportunities within Latin America, say. And another thing that I wanted to discuss is that in some cases, contextualization research and local priorities research might point out that we should do the same thing. So they might coincide in their recommendations. And I wanted to discuss this a bit more because I think this is a relevant case. So when did they coincide? In some regions, the main problems that they face might coincide with the global ones. So for example, if you're based in Burkina Faso, then maybe one of the best ways to help is to donate and work for malaria prevention. So donating to a malaria consortium, which is currently a top give all charity. Maybe if you're in the US, one of the biggest threats to the future of the country is AI safety, and people there are in a good position to do work in this space. So maybe that's the most effective thing that they can do. And in some situations, some specific resource might be restricted to local priorities, and the volume of these resources might be big enough to justify doing this kind of research. So, for example, you could have a case where a billionaire pledges to help the country, and they would want to use their resources effectively. So maybe in this situation, you wouldn't be able to get, if you were to do research with a more global scope, then you wouldn't be able to use these resources. So the volume of resources here might make it worthwhile doing this kind of research with a local focus in mind. But now I guess the important question is, how often do they coincide? How can we figure out when this is the case? Ultimately, this is an empirical question, so it remains to be explored in different contexts. Each situation can have many different factors that make it more or less effective to do local priorities research. But my hunch is that, for example, in global health and development, this is probably true for countries which have a very big population and have relatively lower income. So, for example, India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, I think, are cases where this is very likely to happen. And my guess is that in most cases, where cases here is countries, they will not coincide. And just to give an example, we can think about development in Latin America. So this is the distribution of income in Latin American countries. Most countries in Latin America are actually at least upper middle income countries, and this includes the 10 largest countries in the region. So Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Chile. Chile is actually considered a high income country, and so on. There are some lower middle income countries. Here I list all of them. So El Salvador, Bolivia, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Haiti. And there are no low income countries. Some a small research exploration done by Alejandra Celis suggests that if the difference in cost effectiveness in interventions in Nigeria, which is a lower middle income country, and Colombia might be up to 20x. And so this means that if we're simply trying to get donations to Colombia, we would have to get something maybe a bit less than that due to exchange rates and so on, but something 20x as much, as large a volume of donations to Colombia to compensate for the difference in cost effectiveness. And so in these cases, my impression is that some potentially better options for people who care about health and development would be things like remote work, and this links point to EAGx's website listing some remote positions in charities doing work in health and development, including AMF, Give Directly, academic research in development economics. So like doing research to try to figure out what the best interventions are, or trying to improve the effectiveness of existing interventions. And lastly, like just earning to give and like trying to donate as much as possible to these cause areas to this area with a global scope might end up being better than working with local level health and development. So some of the tentative takeaways that I wanted you to think about is that I think it's like from an effective altruist perspective, I think it's always important to have the global scope in mind when trying to do good. So going for contextualization research, always having like that framing in mind. I also think that contextualization research can often be valuable. So EA is expanding like all over the place, and the conditions in different countries. The conditions in the EA movement in these countries can be substantially different from, say, the US, the UK, where the movement originally started. And so I think this can help us achieve a lot more impact than we would otherwise have. I think it's also really important to understand what the resources are, what the constraints are. So maybe like surveying people to see what fraction of people would only be willing to donate to a certain country, to their own country versus other countries. And trying to get a sense for what people actually care about or are willing to do, what the constraints actually are before doing this kind of research, so that once we do it, we can make sure that we're doing it for, guide how resources will actually be used. And I also think that the bar for doing development interventions in other countries is probably usually high. But that said, I do think that in a number of cases, it will be worth it, like trying to do research at your to improve interventions that operate in your own country. And the last is that these are just some initial thoughts that I had. I think like not that much effort has been put in like developing these kinds of frameworks, and so I think that further work in this area is valuable, both on the theoretical front, so like trying to develop, like think more about a model like this, but also trying to get to the specifics. So trying to see test out the hypothesis, the conjectures that I mentioned about how much people would be willing to donate to their own country versus other countries. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Luis. Okay, I think we might have time only for one question, or maybe two if we're really, really quick. So does anyone want to take this question? And thanks for this clarification for this concepts, because they were really useful for the work.
Also, I have office hours after this talk, and I would be happy to chat to people just, that year.
So you gave these two talks sort of like on the global scope and the local scope. What your personal opinion, what do you want to tackle first when in your careers as an EA? Would you rather start from local and then think global, or then global to local?
I think they serve like different purposes. I think the local priorities, like what I call contextualization research, is useful for people who I think it's most useful for people who actually say want to stay in their own country, just because the process of doing this kind of research can help you learn more about your country and like how you should operate in it. I mean, in the sense that it's valuable career capital. So I think like people in this position are probably better suited. That said, like in my own research, I'm doing like my research is usually with a global focus in mind. So I'm trying to do like global priorities research. That's not contextualization research at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And you can find Luis in the office hours to talk more about this topic. Thank you, Luis.
Thanks, everyone.